Okay, so now that we've actually got Xcode installed, I'm going to now take you through a small little tour of Xcode just to get familiar with Xcode so you kind of know your way around it. Fortunately, Xcode is fairly small, so touring it is not going to take us a lot of time, and a lot of the features here you'll be able to see once and kind of have a feel of how to use them or where they're at. Not like trying to go through all of Visual Studio or Eclipse or something like that. Xcode's still fairly tightly bundled and small IDE, at least in the main usage of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up like a test app that I have here that should demonstrate a lot of Xcode here. So the first thing that you'll notice when you open up Xcode is this left-hand panel here. And here is kind of like your Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. It's going to have all of your project files and let you navigate easily. If we take a look at this view here is the file view, and you can see that it's broken into folders and then the different files. And you can just click on a file and then it'll show up in the main editor. And then you can see here that we have a selection here where you can choose to see all the classes, and you can break it down that way. So this is an easy way to navigate to different methods or classes. A lot easier than trying to find it in the folders here if you know a specific class that you're looking for. Then the next view that you have here is just a search, and this is a simple find here. Whatever your search text is, it should be able to find it inside your classes. And then this view here is actually the warning view, so you can see by file or by type what the warnings are. And then you can see here when you're in the debugger, this will show you threads and queues. So this is only used really in the debugger. And then here is the breakpoint tab. And then this last one here gives you information about what's happened. Like you can see that I have a successful build here, and then I had debugged, and that's chronological there. So this is very useful for navigation here. And then another thing to notice here is this bottom part. And in a lot of the navigation in here, you'll see this little plus sign here. And this plus is going to be to add a file, for example. So we can add a file here to our project. I'll cancel out of this. We have a couple of different views here that you can use to do some filtering here. And this filtering is showing me what is recently worked on, which is really useful if you're jumping back and forth between some files. I usually turn on this filter and then I can see exactly what I've been working in. This next filter will show you the files that have a source control status, which I don't have my files in source control here. And then this one is going to show you unsaved files. And then here you can just do a basic search on whatever's showing up in that window. And so that's it for this document pane here. One thing that you'll notice with Xcode is that just about every single functionality that's in here that you can do from somewhere on the screen, you can also find in the navigation in the menu system. So for example, these are all navigators that we had looked at, and you can see you can do shortcuts for any of these. If we look at the view navigators, we've got project, symbol, search, issue, debug, breakpoint, log, and hide navigator. And so if I go through these, you can see hitting the shortcuts here, it's all menu items, which is kind of useful because it makes it so that anything that you want to do, you can hit from a shortcut. So then the next thing to look at here is the actual editor. So I'll open up a .h file here, and you can see that I've got the source control editor here, and with this I can do a two-finger scroll, which is really useful on a MacBook. So one of the things that I didn't know about when I first got a MacBook was this ability to do this two-finger scroll, which is extremely useful. You just basically hold down two fingers and then you scroll with two fingers, and it'll scroll what's in this window here. Another quick tip, if you're using a touchpad also on your Mac, is a 3-finger swipe will switch. You can see I'm switching between the .h file and the .m file just by doing a 3-finger swipe. Really useful for jumping back and forth. As you're developing an Objective-C, you're going to be jumping back and forth between .h and .m files. Up here, you'll also notice this whole navigation tree. You can see at the different levels, you can jump to the folders or the different projects, and it's got a little navigator here where you could go. You could say, okay, I want to go to the superclass or some protocols that are implemented by this or the includes. Really useful. It's kind of obscure and hidden here, but it's a very useful feature. Use it all the time once I'd found out about it. And of course, you have your back and forward buttons to go back and forward from where you've been. So the next thing to look at here is these editor selections here. So what this will do is give you different views of the editor. So you can see here I've got the normal view selected. If I choose this view, this is kind of an assistant view. And what this will do is basically it's a little bit smart about figuring out what should go with what you have in the editor. So for example, I had said that when you're working Objective-C that you're going to be using the .m and the .h files. Well, since I'm already on this .m, when I use this assistant, it's automatically pulling up the .h side by side here so that I can see it and edit it at the same time. Very useful feature to use. You can see I've pulled up a .h here, and then it's giving me the .m for it. So that's a pretty useful feature. Then this other view here is a version editor, and I don't have different versions set up because I don't have this particular project in source control. But if you do, you can see the different versions of the file and you can compare them, which is also very useful when you're making a lot of changes and you want to know what the history is here. And there's some selections here where you can see the blame and you can see the revisions here. So very useful to remember these. You're probably going to be in this mode and the helper most often. You can also switch it so this window is on the bottom instead. Then you've got this view here, which will just make the panes go away. You can see the bottom pane and the right pane. And this is pretty useful to know if you're working on a smaller screen like a MacBook Air like I am, because you want to have that screen real estate. But it's really easy to get the panes back. I really like how they did this to make it easy to get out of your way, but easy to get it back when you need it. If we look down at the bottom, at this bottom pane here, this is you're mainly going to use in debugging. It has your local and your auto or all of your variables for debugging, your pause, step that you should be pretty familiar with debugging, and then an output view. If we bring up this right pane here, you can see here in this first section we've got properties and then a quick help. And this will change a little bit based on what you have selected. But this quick help I wanted to point out is a really useful feature. You can basically just click on something and then it will show you, basically bring up some snippet of the help from the Apple developer documentation, and you can go and you can click right through and see this documentation and see a lot of information about this. So this is pretty useful. I hadn't discovered this till after I had been working on this for a while, but I wish I did, because I was constantly going to the web trying to look up documentation when it was right here. All I had to do was click on a object to see it. So, and then on this lower part here, this is the utilities here, and you can see that you've got different things, like you can quickly add a file here. You've got some code snippets that you can utilize here, common code snippets. They have a pretty big library by default. You've got your object library, and we'll get into this more when we go into the UI, but just so you know that you can tab through this here. And then media, files, images, things like that. So that's, we may have gone a little bit in depth here, but I didn't mind doing it for this IDE because we've pretty much covered most of the IDE already. Only things we haven't covered on this screen is the run, stop, and then you can select what your target is here if you're familiar with in Visual Studio, and then breakpoints. This is all pretty straightforward though. If you want to set a breakpoint in Xcode, you basically just click in the margin here. You can do a double click or right click to delete a breakpoint. And if you run with a breakpoint, it'll automatically go into debug. If there's no breakpoints, it'll just do a normal run. And you can find all of these commands here in the menu. Here, if we went through these menu options, you would see all the editor commands here, utility, the assistant layout commands. Pretty much everything that we've covered is in here. There's a few other commands that are in the menus that aren't accessible from the UI itself without going through the menu, but almost everything is, which is kind of nice because you can really master Xcode with basically just exploring even on your own. So there's one more piece that I want to show you here, and then we'll have a pretty good foundation of Xcode to begin doing some development. So this organizer here, we can go into this, and this kind of pops up. It's the only thing really that pops up a total new window. And we've got a few tabs here. The first one is devices, and this is where you can have your phone, and it'll store information in your device logs here from your phone, and you can actually do screenshots from your phone here. This is kind of useful if you want to take screenshots for your application. In the library section, we've got your developer profile keys, and I'm not going to go into depth on all of these, but this is basically some of the setup that you'll need to have in order to develop to a real device. This next tab is repositories. Xcode 4 actually has Git embedded into it, so by default when you create a new project it'll be saved in a Git repository and create a Git repository. And here you can see that this project here is under source control, and you can see the branches and all this information about it. You can add projects to source control here. You see you have the commands for the pull and commit. So it's kind of nice that Git is kind of integrated right into Xcode. It also works with SVN. The projects, you can quickly see all the different projects and switch to a project here. Archives is used to publish an app to the App Store. I'll get into this more when we actually publish an app, but just so you know, this is where it's at. And what you basically do is create a snapshot of your app, and then you can submit that to the App Store right here from inside the IDE, which is kind of unique and makes it a lot easier to submit your app. And then this last tab has the documentation, and it's got all of Apple's docs basically for iOS development in Xcode 4 inside here, which is pretty nice. You can also access this from their web. Most of the time I actually go through the web, but it's kind of nice to know that it's all here and it's offline here in case you're not connected to the web. And so really that's it for Xcode. We covered a lot of things here, but don't worry, I just wanted to make sure that you kind of had an idea of where everything was and how it's all laid out. It's kind of nice that you could actually cover an IDE in this short amount of time, and we've really covered pretty much everything there is in Xcode except for Interface Builder, which is we'll cover in a separate module. So now you're an expert on Xcode, at least you should be able to navigate your way around it.